Welcome, everybody, to Modern Aikido's podcast. We're in the new year of 2025. Happy holidays to everybody. Hope everybody had a wonderful Christmas, New Year, whatever your chosen holiday is. I hope it was wonderful and you got to spend time with your family. Kicking off into the new year, now that we're off and going, I've got a guest on, Marcus Encel. He is a senior instructor from Australia. He's on here, and we're going to talk about Aikido past because he's been training for a long, long time, and I'm really excited to hear some of his stories. Welcome, Marcus. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You hope you enjoy being had.
Later.
As always, with folks I interview from across the world, the time zone thing can always be kind of funky arranging it up. So let's just kind of get it kicked off. Marcus, your history goes back a long time. So maybe you could start out with how long you've been doing this and a bit of your background. I know a little bit of it, but I think everybody would like to hear more.
Getting close to 50 years now, I think.
That's admirable.
Yeah. 48 years, I think.
Nice. Did you get started there in Australia, or were you training elsewhere?
I did. I started here. I started in the Goju Kai, actually. They had an Aikido class there. So we had, of course, the Hombu, which was the main style of Aikido back then. Mm-hmm. Although there's always been a school of Tamiki, although they kept to themselves. John Gay, who ran them for till he died, he was good, really good guy, good martial artist. Mm-hmm. And that was pretty much the only other game in town.
Okay.
For a long, long time, till the 80s, I think.
Sure. What got you into Aikido?
Well, my parents. I wanted to do karate, and I wanted to break things and 100 weapons of the body, and use kama, and I had all kinds of plans. But my parents said that I was violent enough, and that they'd both met O-sensei in Japan, and they said, we'll pay for you to do Aikido, but we won't pay for you to do karate. You'll have to get a job. And I'd already done a paper round. I lived in Kew at the time, and it was a very hilly suburb. I thought, no, this is no good. I hated that. It was hardly any money. It was really hard work. I'll do Aikido.
Sure. Now, at the time, 48, 50 years ago, that was quite a while. What was Aikido training like at that time? Was it... everything I'd read from people that had trained Aikido from, the different decades, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, say it was remarkably different than you would, almost unrecognizable from what you would see now. Not so much in terms of what the techniques were, but in terms of training intensity, things like that. How was it different?
I think, I don't know. I mean, I think it was very varied, but that all of the different types of training were accepted. So, for example, the primary school was the Hombu, and you would learn in the Hombu, and you'd have a different teacher every class. Most of them were bad. Some of them were nice people, but not very good martial artists. Others had something to teach you. And there are a few really good guys. One guy in particular, David Brown, was particularly good, and I think he was probably the best of them by far. And he was a bit of a leader in Aikido. But Aikido actually started in Australia with Arthur Morshead, who was the Olympic judo coach. And he had a black belt in Aikido, and he used to teach his students. And just before I started, he heard that he ran the Caulfield Judo School, which was around forever. And he heard that there was a at that time, Rokudan, Sugano Sensei in Sydney. And so he said, look, there's no point me having an Aikido association if you're in the country, maybe you should come down and run it. And it's very generous. Arthur was a great guy, I just have to say. I have a lot of respect for Arthur. Knew him for many, many years. He used to go to his Christmas parties, and he was a very good man, good fighter too. And anyway, Sugano Sensei, he had these students. I think primarily at the time it was Tony Smybert, Bob Botterill, and David Brown. And then at the time when Sugano Sensei took over, he promptly went back up to Sydney and installed Tony as the head of the style, who basically became the head of Aikido in Australia till pretty recently, I think. And so you'd have like Hombu style training, and every year there'd be a summer school with Sugano Sensei, and everybody would make a pilgrimage to see him. But I will say that, the training was really varied. It was that, from kooky kind of metaphysical to effective. But primarily when David Brown was teaching, it was effective. And there were a couple of other people that could kind of do it well, but it's like Bob Botterill was, he's a good Aikidoka.
Sure.
But I just have to say, I've got a lot of respect for Tony Smybert. I really liked him. I thought he was a very good man. And he never made great pretensions of being an amazing fighter or anything. But I guess the variety was huge. It was very difficult to make progress because every time you went there, you had a different teacher. But for me, it was valuable training at the time because I thought it was all good. I didn't know better. And, I'd do stuff that was virtually magic. And, but because I'm a kind of practical person in that way, I made it work for me, and I made stuff out of it, whether it was there originally or not. I can't remember. I was started when I was 14. But I made stuff work for me, and it was good.
Yeah.
And but there was no doubt in those days that Aikido worked. All the martial arts believed in Aikido, and it doesn't matter what style, what kind of fighting art they were in. And an anecdote I could tell you about is from modern times. Bob Jones, who's like a pioneer of the Australian fighting scene, and he was what became known as Zendukai. Karate style was really, he pioneered kickboxing in Australia and Melbourne. And, he basically ran all the bouncers, back in up until the 80s, bouncers were essentially criminals, and, they were pretty rough kind of lot.
Sure.
And,
well, you have to be, because you're often dealing with not only people who are inebriated, but sometimes the darker side of humanity.
Well, I'd say there's a lot of hard bouncers now, but there's also a lot of kind of steroidy poses. But I guess Bob's crew were the first kind of martial arts trained bouncers in Australia, anyway.
Okay.
And they were tough guys. They'd always been tough, and they were always good fighters. I mean, they taught. It became a huge corporation, so they had all kinds of people from all over Australia, from families to hardcore fighters. But
sure.
But to rise up in the Zendukai, you had to be a good fighter. There was no two ways about it.
That reminds me of a very dear friend, that he got into the martial arts kind of similarly to the way you did. But I remember him telling me that, when he was young, he was a very aggressive, very tough, probably one of the toughest men I've ever met. And his parents put him into martial arts basically to try to temper the steel a little bit, to give him introduce discipline and some of the things that needed to be there with somebody who was just that tough. And I know many people that get into the martial arts are looking to be trained in that toughness. And I think you can, but there are certain people that just it's a part of their personality, and it is like a drive or a willpower to it's a part of themselves that it's very hard to train that into take somebody who is, perhaps meek, perhaps docile, or whatnot, and train that toughness. You can kind of put them in with tough people and hope that they start to, get into that level of behavior, but it can be very difficult. I've seen people that struggle, that they never build it. They can get all sorts of technical ability in the martial arts, but don't have that toughness to apply it, or like what you were experience of making it work, of making something that maybe doesn't look terribly functional to actually make it work in under pressure.
Well, I could say like a number of anecdotes along those lines. I mean, I think this kind of fighters are born, not made, really. And but at the same time, if you smash everybody that comes through the door, they might not necessarily be able to get to the point where they become good, or they might.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
And but I think that leads us to kind of where we are now. I mean, in my case, right, I always wanted to be able to fight, and I started in earnest. I'd already been doing that, but I kind of did it in the once a week kind of bracket.
Mm-hmm.
But I got in a street fight where I was bashed by about 30 guys. I actually made a friend there who taught me how to box, which is a whole other story. But yeah, I thought they were going to kill me, and I was like spitting my blood on them, and then they kind of let me go because they were just really surprised. But I made friends with this guy, Sean, who taught me how to fist fight. And sometime after that, I'd had a fractured skull in a fight when I was a kid, and that had obviously scarred my brain, although I didn't know at that stage. At some point, I developed epilepsy, and anyway, this guy and I, we were going to a rock festival, and we got into another fight. It was pretty brutal. I got the shit crap beaten out of me, and he jumped in and knocked a few of these guys out. But we both got a hiding, and he got really bad concussion, and I had a fit a few days later, and I just vowed to. I felt really helpless. It was kind of felt like I mean, for lack of a better explanation, of like being raped or something. You couldn't really do anything about it. You just had to take it. And it wasn't the hiding so much that humiliated me, was that that my friend jumped in to help me and I couldn't help him. And I instinctively ran. I thought, well, he's going to run too, surely. But he didn't. He stood and fought them for me, and he got a really bad hiding as well. And I felt very ashamed of that. And I thought I'll die rather than letting that happen again. And
well, I'm glad you. That's a great story, and because I know that among the Aikido and martial arts community, the Aikido community especially, it's the sentiment is very commonly spoken that, well, if you're faced with violence, just run away. And I like that you described that one of the potential downsides of running away is you might leave somebody that's, like you said, trying to help you. And then what happens when that happens, whether or not that's, your friend that jumps in to try to help you, maybe it's your wife or your girlfriend or somebody else who's helpless, who can't run or cover ground like you can. I mean, they always say that joke about, when we go bear hunting, I don't have to run faster than the bear. I just have to run faster than you. But that does have psychological effects later. and you describe it perfectly. One of the things that can happen, or what if you try to run but you can't, or you're not successful at it.
Well, they might be faster. I mean, that's happened to me another time too. I tried to run away, but it just doesn't always work.
Right.
And the bottom line is, people are going to mug you. It's like, lions don't go for the head buffalo; they go for the weak lambs or the weak ones. And it's like
the easy prey.
Even
exactly.
if they know that they can beat you, they don't want to get hurt doing it. It's very unlikely, if you're not kind of directly challenging their masculinity, that you're going to end up fighting them if they think they're going to get hurt. Or the odds go down a lot more.
Right.
But where were we? We're on Aikido.
There are precious few psychopaths that really do enjoy the violence, enjoy fighting, but the vast majority, they want your stuff. They want what it is they want. They don't want to fight. They want to take. And easy taking is preferable to hard taking.
That's right. But Aikido back then, Aikido was people didn't think that it was weak, but there was a lot of weak people doing Aikido, because Aikido was like, that, people who couldn't fight were respected, and were treated nicely, which I've always thought was a really good thing about Aikido. But it wasn't like Aikido as a thing was like lame and weak. And I think it's like, it makes me laugh now, because people do like executive boxing and stuff, and they think they're boxers, or they think, they might as well be doing, a non-contact martial art, for kind of the amount that they can defend themselves. But the real thing, I mean, that was one thing I wanted to discuss. People always going on about pressure testing, and I hate that terminology, because I don't think they really do want pressure testing. Because to me, like, I've been around forever, 99.9% of people who do martial arts don't want to put in what it takes to be a fighter. And that's okay. Like, you have to have a bad childhood or be a bit mentally ill or both, to kind of want to do that. And, I mean, I know the injuries that I've got training, and, completely sane people, or people, they don't do it. Why would they? Why would you get hurt every day? Why would you turn up to training and know that you're not going to have a relaxing time? You're going to fight for your life when you go in there. And that's going to be whether you feel good, whether you feel bad, whether you're happy, you're sad. It's a weird thing.
That's it. I like that you mentioned it that way. And I see a great parallel in the business world and in people's financial future. Everybody wants to be a millionaire. Very few people want to do the work that it takes to become a millionaire. They don't want to hear about long days, getting up, being dedicated, working 7 days a week, living in a small apartment while they get their business together, or, what have you. They don't want to know about the discipline, or they turn their nose up at it when it comes time to, put your nose to the grindstone and hump it out, work it out, figure out how you're going to build that $1 million, or how you're going to do it. That work is a turnoff. They're into the reward. And I know what you mean, because about, of course, everybody wants to say, well, I want to be a competent, martial artist or fighter, or I want to have the physical skills to protect myself and my family. Like, that's the $1 million. But going and sweating and going into a training session, which should always be a little bit stressful. It should always be a little bit of, I'm kind of worried. I don't want to get, bruised or banged up. And you wind up going through that stress inoculation aspect, because in the real world, there will be an abundance of stress. And if you never get used to it, it's kind of like doing push-ups. If you never do push-ups and then you go to do 20 push-ups, you're going to be hating it. But if you do push-ups every day and and you hate it a little bit every day and you build up, then when it comes time, you got to bang out 20 or 30, you can do it without any problem. It's the process that gets you there. And you know, I think that the process is also what provides the peace, the true confidence, the true satisfaction, the true health of your body and your mind and your spirit together comes from the stress and the work and the what would you say, the discomfort. I don't want to say pain, because you shouldn't be injuring yourself in training constantly, but it is painful. It is stressful. Your training should take you to a place where you're uncomfortable, so you can become comfortable in that uncomfortable place. That's how I view training and how I look at it. It's I go back to that old military doctrine. It's the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Well,
or as Rommel would say, he said, sweat saves blood, blood saves lives, and brains save both. I think that's my favorite version.
Yeah, it's kind of like the you fight like you train maxim.
It's all parallel to exactly that. And I have yet to find an exception to those.
But what I kind of feel about it is, like, Aikido could be a lot of things to a lot of people, and that's okay. Yeah. But I feel like the modern practitioner doesn't know what they're doing. They think that, you know, they're going to put in less effort than a mugger and be able to fight 10 guys, or they're going to, I don't even know what they're thinking, It's obvious that, you get out of something what you put in it. And most of my students, they don't want to be fighters. They want to have friends and do something, learn some skills. And they do learn that. Others want to be, like, really good, and they train with that base. And I feel like Aikido is a place where you can have that. You can have all those people training on a mat together and having a good time and learning useful stuff. But to me, like, and mind you, what I believe, Aikido, I don't really think it necessarily has to, other people have to take it to heart. I'm not one of those kind of guys. But I feel that your Aikido has to, whatever it is, like whether it's ineffective or effective, it has to be what you say it is. It has to represent.
There's an honesty there. An honesty that has to be there.
You say it is. And that, if you want to be a fantastic fighter and do Aikido, then you're going to get injured. You're going to, you're not going to do it and not be hurt. It's just not going to happen. And you're not going to get better than the guys that are prepared to get injured. And you're not going to get better than the guys that do have experience without having experience. At the same time, you don't want to brutalize people. You don't want to take someone who hasn't seen a lot of violence and force them into a lot of violence. But, I feel like basic Aikido training teaches you to escape, reverse, and suppress, kind of. But to assertively put together a changing game plan in real violence and take control against skilled people, like, that requires a level of dedication most people are not prepared to be involved with. And that's the decision they have to make. If you want to be good, don't think you're going to come twice, 3 times a week, not get too much of a sweat and not see any real action and be good at it. Like, obviously, if you want to fight the BJJ fighters, the kickboxers, the hoodlums, you have to, at the minimum, put the same effort into it that they do.
Yep. One of the I had somebody, it was a mentor to me. I guess you'd call an instructor, but it was a little bit more informal than that. But he had a ton of real world violence experience, not just, and he had kind of the trifecta, which is a lot of martial arts training. He was prior military. He was also a competitive fighter. And then he also, from there, after the military, went into the police force, and he wound up being having a lot of exposure to real world violence that way. And I remember him explaining to me, it's like, first off, anybody who does violence will do their own style of training with it. He would describe how, bikers and whatnot have their own kind of martial art. They never stepped into a dojo for it, but they used the tools that they had. They had their own techniques. They may not have a lot of them, but the few that they had were very effective at what they did. And they had their own method of practicing. It wasn't the way that you'd envision it, that from a traditional martial arts background. But, don't overlook the fact that these people, especially those who deal in a world where violence is a not uncommon thing, that they have their method, they practice it, they will share it with one another, usually within their own, their own tribe or their group or what have you. But they do have it and they do practice it. And if you think they don't, because you don't see them going to a dojo or you don't imagine them doing that, you're going to be woefully unprepared when you run into their art. And it surprises you because it's probably different than what you're expecting, or maybe you're not expecting anything at all. It can be very, very dangerous. And that includes even, street hoods and things like that. If they carry a knife, they probably practice how to draw it quickly. They're not going to fumble around when they know that seconds matter. They'll be able to perform, to some degree. And, so they have, like you said, they have a level of discipline, usually because they know that if they fail, it could be their life, or it could be a severe beating or something of that nature. And I think this is something that your kind of typical suburbanite who lives in a very comfortable environment, never gets exposed to violence, has a hard time really understanding of what the ante on the table is. They picture violence as, oh, I lose my wallet, or I get my purse taken, or I get, if I have money in my pocket, that gets taken away from me. And, violence can go well beyond that.
Well, I was talking, with, I always say this to my students, but, most of them don't really understand it, I guess. But, real self-defense is not really about the techniques. And it's like you could do anything or nothing. It's the thing that a biker's got, or that a hoodlum's got, or it's the spider knows its web. And the thing is, it's like a fight, or certainly dangerous fights I've been in, they don't start, you kind of know you're in a fight. You've got your guard up, off you go. It's not like a competitive fight. It's like someone hits you and the fight's on. Or you look around, you're surrounded.
Right.
And it's like, it's go hard or go down. And it's, and basically, it's knowing the environment and what to do in the environment. I always say to my students, like, we practice this stuff, but the stuff that I've never seen in any self-defense course, that to me is the real self-defense, is that when you walk down the street and you see someone walking to you asking for a light, do you know that they're going to mug you? Can you see the trap? Mm-hmm. And if you are in the trap, and you see them all coming around you, there's that moment. It's like, well, I'm outgunned here. I don't want to fight these guys. I'll probably lose, if not die here. I don't want to be punching second here either. But if I start, it's on, and I'm probably going to lose bad. And if I don't go first, I'm almost certainly going to lose bad. So what's that point where I go all out? And it's almost,
and that's the part that it's almost impossible to simulate in a dojo setting, because you're using your perception, your instincts, your strategic brain. Like, where am I? How would I get to a safer place than here if I had to? And you're calculating so many things that are not even a factor in
It's
a
also
training
like
environment.
just an animal sense that you've developed through your training. And I was talking with one of my students about this. He's a good fighter anyway. He's like did karate for years before he did Aikido. And he was in the army, in the infantry. And I was talking about how, like, you know, when I was a kid, like 18, in my first house, and, you know, I thought I was hard, but one of my other mates who at that stage got addicted to crack, well, not crack, but crank, which is kind of a similar thing in Australia. He brought around this guy to my house that was like the bookie from Pentridge, which was like the hardest prison in Melbourne. And like, I'd never met someone like that in my life. It was a murderer in my house, you know, and he was not smart, but he was smart about violence. But he was like, you know, and we were all just, you know, kids sitting around smoking weed. And he's like, wants money and stuff. I don't have any money. And I thought, well, you know, I might as well get him out of the house. If it's no point of us all getting hammered, I'll see if I can get him out of the house, and hopefully I can get away with him. If not, it'll be just me and not everyone. Anyway, we went on this mad ride, and he was in the back and I was in the front with my mate Gary. And this clown was in the back, and he was drinking, and every now and again he'd try and strangle me from the back. And I'd be like fighting him off my neck as he's twisting my head over the back of the seat. And Gary was high as a kite, and he's driving with one hand, and every now and again, leave him alone, Jimmy, and punch him in the face. And we're like, I mean, I'd never been in a car ride like that before. And I'm just thinking, I'm talking to him, talking him down the whole time. And anyway, I managed to take him to a pub and get him some weed and give him some money, and I split. And the point of all that is that I just used my wits to get out of the situation when I was outgunned. But you can't be panicked and thinking, well, you know, I know Aikido, or I know whatever, I know kickboxing, I'm going to fight this guy. It's like, this guy's like a whole, you know, you might think you're in the university of violence. This is the PhD of violence. This is the professor emeritus of violence, you know.
Yeah.
And he's got nothing to live for. You know, and they're difficult things. So really, you have to develop the skills, or you have to be the kind of person that can make a plan, can implement it in the most stressful situation possible, be as wily as a fox, you know, and resilient. And
you know, that's
a
one of the
hard
things
from
too
any
I've
skill.
noticed about, and not just like within the Aikido community, but within quite a few martial arts, as people tend to want to understand others, they will impose their own viewpoint. They'll assume that everybody else has the same viewpoint that they do. Well, I want to be peaceful. I don't want to be in violence. Everybody else must be that way as well. And if I'm just a peaceful person, then I'm not going to be involved in any violence, because, you know, I won't engage in it. I won't be the one to step in that realm, which is great until you run across somebody like you just described, somebody who doesn't mind it or even likes it. Now, what do you do with somebody that does not view the world as you do?
Or even if you think you are that guy, you meet the guy that's just so many levels above than you are. Like, you know, you've been in a street fight, he's murdered a whole lot of people. Right. And he does it often. You know, he's been in jail for 20 years. He doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's the thing, you know, even when I was competitive fighting, and, you know, you say, okay, I'm really good at doing this, or like I'm fast, or I'm whatever talent you believe you have, there's always somebody that's going to be better at it than you are at doing that particular thing. And then you have to adjust. You're like, well, I'm not going to run. I don't want to deal with that part. I want to deal with a different part. And so I think that, you know, to assume though, that if you come from a peaceful environment, and that you never, you know, your exposure to violence is watching movies or TV shows, you you're woefully unprepared for that predator or that monster, like, somebody you described that just will engage in violence just for kicks. He won't want to hurt, really, put a major hurt on you or try to kill you, but you're going to be way in over your head.
Or he'll rob you, rape you, and kill you.
Right, exactly. It could go farther and be that too. And that's why that stress part and understanding, I view really martial arts, now that I've been doing it, not nearly as long as you have. I've been doing it since about 1980 or so. I don't do a lot of math, but that's about 40, 45 years. Is what I realize is that martial arts, if you really break them down, are not about physical. It's about understanding human behavior. And when you go to train, whether it's self-defense or even sport martial arts, or any type of martial art, what you're learning is to how to deal with another mentality. That mentality is trying to dominate you. From a self-defense point, it's trying to get something from you against your will. And how do you build your mentality to handle it, to be defiant, to say, no, you're not going to take this. You're not going to take my life or my belongings, or you're not going to harm my family. And to, establish your boundary and then reinforce it with action. And that does take mental preparedness. And I think that's a big part of the stress inoculation. Yes, you sweat, and yes, you'll get bruised and whatnot, but the mentality is the ability to keep you going through all that and not quit, not give up, and to go until you prevail.
Well, I definitely think that. And I think it's like, not that you want to die, but you've got to not be scared to talk about dying, and you've got to be ready to die under certain circumstances.
Yep.
And that's liberating. I mean, my ideas of violence have changed over the years, and my ideas of Aikido. I mean, I've read everything, apart from what I know, the people I've known, and I've read everything there is to read about O-Sensei, and I used to know Stan Prennan. I was old Aikido officers. I've worked for Aikido briefly, but I don't believe most people have got any grasp of what O-Sensei's Aikido was and is. But Aikido got, getting back to what you're saying about what happened to modern Aikido, Aikido was, I mean, it's a conundrum, but it's horrible to say, but I think it was perverted by this peace movement. And I mean, sounds like it should be a tautology, but I believe in peace, but I also know from experience there's a time where it just won't work. And getting back to what you're saying before, like, I wasn't taught to run away in Aikido, but I was taught by my mother and father. But my mum could fight better than my dad, who was a weightlifter, but I was taught that and just did it instinctively. But people can catch you, and they can be better runners, but the whole thing is that running's not always appropriate. But what I was going to say was that, to me, Aikido is about the path of least resistance. It's not like, that translation of like Aikido is love. That's completely wrong. There's no love in the Japanese language, not like we see love. It's like you could say Aikido is like unity with nature or something, but it's not like love, like I love you. It's just, that's not what it is.
I think the love thing was probably more of a marketing strategy.
Well, this is where I was going with it. It's like, I think Aikido got trapped by its marketing, because in the kind of peace movement was when it started to get popularized. Like first Koichi Tohei went to Hawaii and with O-Sensei, and it started to blow up just as when all the vets came back, and the vets were, Vietnam vets were, pretty mucked up, but they needed, something that was, that put their training to work, but didn't brutalize them further, and they understood it. And there were a lot of servicemen who did Aikido. I've trained with them, and a lot of other martial artists who did other martial arts from the military and knew about Aikido and really liked it. They might have done something else like Hapkido, or if they were in the Korean War, or, I can tell you some stories about some of those guys, but they were like people that had been brutalized, came back from the occupational forces and had Aikido skills. And then Tohei Sensei went to Hawaii, and then at some point, it's a bit unclear what happened there, but there was either it was some kind of jealousy between O Sensei and Tohei, or just the kind of family thing that his son wanted to have more control over stuff. And he came to the fore, and he commercialized it, and he put in gradings, like in judo, put colored belts in, and he actually did the Ikkyo he named the techniques as they're kind of currently named, Ikkyo to Yonkyo, all that stuff. It was all Ikkyo before. He changed the terminology, some of that was good because it was descriptive. Whereas O Sensei spoke in florid kind of Shinto parables. He was a weird cat. He was a good martial artist, but he wasn't, in a classical sense, a great teacher. And but then when it came back, it started certainly in Australia in the universities, and the universities were the hotbed of the anti-Vietnam movement. And, they were in protests and stuff, and they were doing Aikido. They wanted to be able to protect themselves, getting bashed by cops and by skinheads, they're a bit different from probably an American skinhead, but they were kind of same kind of vibe, but different fashion, I guess. Sure. And they wanted to be able to protect themselves. And to them, it was like Aikido is the kind of the peaceful person's martial art. Because O Sensei post-war was talking about making a bridge between East and West, and he used to fight to kill people, but then he realized that you could use the martial arts to, build your psychic power, but not like hurt people, use it to build up society instead of tear down society. But at the same time, he was trained to kill people. And my interpretation of him saying you don't hurt people is you don't kill them, because all the techniques are lethal. Like if you throw someone cocky, you can break their back instead or hit their head on the floor. Same with Irimi, same with, it's the civilian version of the finish of that technique, or a quick version. I mean, it depends on the circumstances. I mean, no point going into a big technical thing here, but to me, it's like, well, I haven't killed him with a sword. I might have broken his arm. I haven't hurt him. It's not like it didn't hurt. And nobody tapped to a technique because it didn't hurt. I mean, whether they were injured or not.
Right.
It's not because it doesn't hurt, But anyway, it got taken away by the peace movement. And but then by the time I started, there are a lot of, I don't know what kind of language I use, but a lot of lame ducks in Aikido. They'd kind of go into Aikido. Now, to me, it's like, you don't need to be able to fight to do a martial art. You don't have to be a fighter. But a lot of people that were weak become bullies when they feel they've got a bit of power.
And that's true.
What plagued not just Aikido, but the Japanese martial arts in general was the senpai kohai system. Now, I like the senpai kohai system, but it has to be used properly. You've got to know that is a feudal system from a feudal country. And you would see this stuff like people interpreting Japanese feudal culture in a way to give themselves power on the mat, rather than what it was, a way to train safely and show respect to people who've been there longer than you. Right. like you would in any kind of military scenario. And basically, when people are fighters, you have to have some kind of code of conduct. You can't just be all, pissing on each other's legs. Something's going to go wrong.
Yep.
And but it became farcical. I mean, when I first went to Japan, I was a lot younger and a lot more defiant but one day I got this argument with a bunch of guys, like people are scurrying around like little beetles trying to do stuff for sensei. And everybody's kind of arguing with each other about who to tell what to do what. And there's like 10 or maybe it was 13 uchideshi on one 4x2. Might have been a 10-foot long bit of wood. And they go, well, why aren't you going to help? And I said, well, no. I mean, either I'll carry it myself, but I'm not going to be like the 14th person on one bit of wood. I mean, we're not moving a tree here. Like, could go and do something else useful. And there was that kind of thing. People would all be trying to order each other around, and the focus wasn't on the training. And you'd see all these people, like, because of the instructional method, and everybody sees the instructor instructing, it's like, well, I want to be that guy. And so you have all these incompetent people like trying to teach other people how to do techniques. It's like, just shut up and train. Like, you don't need to be teaching anything. Like, off you go.
I find it, I've noticed similar types of things and within different realms. And again, like you just said, when you get people who are weak, or they have self-esteem problems, or they want to be respected, they're desperate, and they get a little bit of a taste of, oh, I've got some sort of power over this junior person, and they can basically become a little mini tyrant. And they can, the sad part is as they build their skills and have more time in, they may never get to the point where they realize they have a responsibility to be constructive for those people underneath them, and not just to treat them, lord them around or order them around or things like that. Sometimes that tyranny can go all the way to the top, where somebody, that's the part of martial arts they enjoy. They enjoy being woven into a social culture where they've got authority or a certain amount of deference from people that are underneath them, and they really never looked at, well, how do I just train to build the skills that I need to have or that I want to have? That's not really part of the equation. And when I hear people say, well, I'm not into Aikido or for the martial aspect of it, I start to think, well, what aspect are you in it for? Are you one of these people that wants to be, climb the social hierarchy within some sort of a training group, which is, to use the benevolent term, you could also say that that's cult-like behavior, because that's how cults behave, is they show you the promise of wielding this power over other people, usually with secret knowledge that not everybody has, but people who come to you want it, and then you, in exchange for their obedience, you dole out a little bit of knowledge here, a little bit of knowledge there. And that's the part that, whether it's Aikido, other martial arts, or any other realm, that just creeps me out. I do not like cults. I don't like manipulation of other people to feed somebody's ego, or to feed their whatever hole they have inside them that they feel that fills. It's just a major turnoff. And I've picked up on that vibe from many martial artists, instructors, where they strut around and they want to be respected, and they play to that. And some are even very good martial artists, and that's what they use as their, well, come to me, young Padawan, and and I will bestow knowledge upon you. But boy, you're going to do what I tell you to do and be obedient to earn what you get from me. And that's always turned me off.
Well, I mean, I think there's that, but there's also, they say the fish rots from the head, but also, there's just a whole lot of weird stuff. Like, I really take offense to that guy Rokas. I think You know, he's like, he seems to be a nice guy. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't want to badmouth him in that sense, but I look at his journey, like being famous for dissing Aikido, like he's basically his discipline. And he's kind of only really famous with Aikido people. So the people he's putting down, essentially.
Yeah.
And
yeah, had he just gone and said, I'm going to improve myself, and then shown him going and doing other trainings, he would have probably 900 followers on YouTube. But he found the magic recipe, which is to diss his art and unload his psychological trauma, which, to be fair, was imposed on him by somebody else, and he just embraced the trauma and made a channel on it.
Well, his story, as I understand it, is that he had his own school, and he feels betrayed by his school, because when he started dissing Aikido, they all left him. Now, imagine having a teacher that's teaching you self-defense and philosophy, and then say, "Oh, well, none of it works. I'm going to do something else." Like, what would you think of that person? But I think, and he thinks, but they all left me and they didn't like me anymore. It's like, well, yeah, of course. But what infuriated me was not that he goes in to train with not even a professional fighter. So the guy's obviously never sparred. He's never really had any fights or whatever. So what makes him, whether he's a black belt or not, think he's going to get in the ring with someone who can fight and fight them? What on earth made him think he could do that? It's like, do I watch TV? Do I watch ballet on TV and think I'm going to do ballet? Or do I watch gymnastics and think I'm going to be able to do gymnastics? It's like, you're a clown. Like, what are you talking about? And also, he didn't even do his own art. It's like he went into whole other thing. It's like, but
well, I think that personally, the value that Rokas showed was how bad the delusion got. He was a case study in, this is what's wrong with contemporary Aikido, how far it's gone, and what happens when you take somebody who got it stuck in their head, and that programming was installed by his instructor.
But can you blame another person? I mean, what I was going to say was, like, here's a guy, right? He's decided that he can fight based on nothing.
Right.
And so he's been toyed with by someone that's better. And instead of looking at himself, he blamed Aikido.
Right. Well, now, and that's the thing. Once you're an adult, you got to own your choices. You got to own what you do, and granted, he should not have run around and said, well, this is my instructor's fault. He said, I was misled, and he kind of does that a little bit, but not to get into the Rokas thing too terribly deeply, I guess, but it's, once you're an adult, you better own what you're doing. And if you want to go fix it, go fix it. And I think he did carry around baggage a lot longer than he needed to. If something's really bugging you, just set it down, walk away, and go fix it. Like, don't need to make a drama about it. Just, go get it taken care of. Change your path if what you find your path is not satisfying you. Get on another one.
Let's just get back to where I was going with it. Was like the fix for Aikido. The fix for Aikido. It's like, when I was young, 15 or something. Anyway, this guy that I met in a street fight, he was a boxer. And I was doing Aikido, and one day it's like, oh, we're getting stoned inside. And it's like, let's have a spar. I'm like, sure, I'm up for anything. And I said, what are the rules? He said, oh, no rules. You can do whatever you like. I'll just box. I'm like, okay. Anyway, we go out there, and he was good to me. He would just jab. He basically just jabbed me, right? bang, bang. And I'm like, he's like this floating head occasionally punching me. And I would go harder and harder, and I still couldn't get him with anything. And the few times I did time a strike properly, because of the way I'd been taught by my then teacher, I was a step out. So even when I got the timing right, I missed like by half a step.
Because of the range was too long?
My range was too long, yeah. And I came away from that, and I didn't dislike Aikido. It was completely apparent what had happened. Like, I thought we both did martial arts. This guy grew up in the commission flats. He's fought every day of his life. He is a boxer. Boxers beat each other up all the time. Like, I don't have the range. I don't have the range. I don't actually have the skill in doing these. Like, I practice things, but I don't actually practice them in a combat situation. And that was the beginning for me. We would always just spar, and I would spar with anyone with Aikido. And I didn't like trying to kickboxing to spar. I'd spar my Taekwondo mates with Aikido, my evil street fighting mates, my, everybody in the street, anybody that came along. And that's how you learn how to fight with Aikido. It's no special.
Sounds like a Gozo Shiota kind of situation. He liked doing that, from what I heard.
Yeah, well, but it's like, there's lots of things you could do. You could, there are, like, you can spar under rules, and that can be good too, because that will always, no matter what martial artists say about, like limiting your techniques, it's going to give you the reflexes to do whatever you like. But even so, it's like, if you really want to do it, then that's how you do it. But this pressure testing, do people want to take the injuries? I know I've had, like, shoulder reconstructions, broken noses. One of my students broke my leg when I was sparring in the park after COVID. Like, but obviously I didn't stop. That's what it is. And there's always people that'll say, "Oh, stop! Oh, you're getting old." It's like, well, maybe, could have happened when I was young. It's harder when I'm old, but whatever, But what I'm trying to say is that whatever you do is okay. If I've got a student and they want to, just be confident, that's good too. But you don't want to have someone, whatever they do on the mat it's on them. And it's like, I always say, the mat is like a microcosm of the world. Like, whatever's wrong with you is going to come out, because you're interacting with these people. There's cooperation, and there's being assertive, being cooperative, and the dynamic is very subtle.
Right.
And
I wanted to mention too, because you reminded me of this. I met a gentleman years ago who he was a Nidan in Aikido, and he had this kind of a similar thing, I guess. He decided to spar with this guy, and this dude was big and very strong. And I don't recall if he was a wrestler or not, but he said that this guy closed in on him and just grabbed him and picked him up over his head. And he said, that day I quit Aikido because I had no idea how to deal with that. And it's the point of that story really is how you responded to it. I liked what you described about responding to, being outmaneuvered by this boxer. You didn't just say, "All right, Aikido's all bullshit, I'm going to quit." You said, "All right, my training is valid, but this is something I haven't figured out how to defeat yet." You didn't just abandon your whole art and all of your training. You took it as a lesson. And I think that kind of like Rokas, this poor guy was not prepared for this type of an attack, wasn't ready to recognize it or know how to deal with it. That wasn't a criticism of his whole art. It just, he had a hole in his training. And rather than say, all right, how about I address this hole, rather than just give up. And what he did was, and this is still pretty surprising to me, he just gave up and became a bodybuilder. He just said, if I have tremendous strength, that's what I need. And, like, well, that's a kind of an interesting interpretation of the lesson. But, what I feel he walked away from was remarkable. He put that many hours into your training to just completely walk away, to cry it and walk away from it. And so it sounds like Rokas kind of did the same thing, but I think people can be faced with that crisis of faith when they're training. They have an expectation, and then they find out in reality that they had a false expectation or false confidence or what have you. The question of your character is, what do you do when that happens?
Exactly. And the thing is that, whatever martial art you do, you'll come to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And are you a quitter, or are you,
right?
Are you not? And
mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like it was said to me once, you only need 3 techniques to be a martial artist, and that's an attack, a defense, and a counterattack.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously as a novice, you're not going to know this. Like you can tell by, I guess, you see in your comments, like it's only the people who know nothing and say horrible things in the comments. But, there's nothing you see in a Krav Maga class that you couldn't do in Aikido.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to be a genius. Like if I just want to hurt someone, I can stick a pencil in their eye. I can stick my finger in their eye. I can, you don't have to be a genius to work it out. But to do it under pressure at the right time, that takes something else.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy that taught me how to box, he was just English style boxing. His father had learnt from Ambrose Palmer, who was a very famous trainer in
mm-hmm.
Australia, and he'd formerly been in the British Army. And he would, when he fought someone, I've seen him fight a lot of different guys, from karate guys to all kinds of different martial artists. He would only box them. I mean, he might headbutt them or kick them in the balls, but he would basically box them. And he had solutions for every attack with boxing.
Mm-hmm.
And, he could slip out of a grapple, and hit him with punches. He could basically deal with any kind of kick with his boxing. Mm-hmm. All his boxing, his boxing was, geared to street fighting, really.
Sure.
And it's the same with Aikido. It'd be the same with anything. Like, you see the Gracies when they fight. They don't just only do Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. They're kicking a bit, they're punching. They've got a few things that they might,
mm-hmm.
use to get them in their preferred range if they're not. Mm-hmm. But, it depends what your art is too. There might be a bit of this and a bit of that. But essentially, what's really required is exposure to the other martial arts, not like someone does something good, I'm going to try and do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say to my students, it's like, I've had those people like, oh, I tried to spar some Taekwondo guy and I was trying to do Kotegaeshi and I couldn't do it. I said, what are you trying to do Kotegaeshi for? If the guy's kicking you, and but I always teach them, it's like, you don't decide what technique to do. You're kind of defending yourself, and then you get in, and whatever's there, you take that and you do it. It's not like I decide back here exactly what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. It's like I'm a moving gun platform. I'm not like in my library, writing a book kind of thing.
One thing that in bringing up the boxing that is a pet peeve of mine is how many times I see Aikidoka dissing boxing for it being simple or brutish. It's not. It is a very respectable art that if you don't understand just how good it is, it's usually because you have never encountered it. or
Well,
encountered
boxing's
somebody,
like 100
you know,
or
it
200.
is, to me, I'd put it up there with wrestling as you better respect the art, because if you don't, it's because you don't understand it at all, have no comprehension of what it's capable of doing, or somebody even with moderate skill, just how good that can be at making your day a living hell.
Well, I think, I mean, they go together. But in the old days, like, you know, boxing was the antidote to wrestling, and wrestling was the antidote to boxing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But most could do a bit of both,
Mm-hmm.
But because they could do a bit of both, they could stay in their own range.
Right.
And
we're well rounded. Somebody that boxes some and wrestles some, if he comes across a higher skilled boxer, well, don't try to outbox the guy that's better than you at boxing. You better go to your wrestling.
Well, this is where we were going before. It's like,
yeah.
If you're doing Aikido and you face someone who's a kicker, you don't try and kick with them. If you're facing someone who's a wrestler or a jiu-jitsu fighter, you don't try and do jiu-jitsu or wrestling with them. It's like, you do you. You just
Right.
look like. And my example always is, how people say, oh, well, look, the stance is no good. Like, you can get your front leg kicked in Aikido. And I say, sure, I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I can get my front leg kicked. Mm-hmm. So I know you're going to try and kick it. And in a sense, that's a bait, or it could be a lot of things.
Sure.
But the humney is the humney because it works. It's not there because Sensei just decided it was going to be a humney. But there's no strategy that is perfect from every angle at every moment. It's like, it's a dynamic thing. And, just like one spider, like the people we're talking about originally, that hoodlum knows his web. You've got to know your web. You've got to know where you need to get them to win this fight. What you're going to need to do, because you're certainly not going to be able to do what they do better than them, chances are. And if you can, well, it's probably not that much of a problem.
And that reminds me, I'm a big Sun Tzu fan when he said, know your enemy and know yourself, and in 100 battles, you'll never be in peril. I like how you put know your web, know their web. That's, to me, exactly what Sun Tzu was talking about.
Yeah. And, it's like people want to be Bruce Lee or some mythical person, like, that guy on TV that is fighting 100 guys and has got a little bruise here and a little trickle of blood out of his nose, or gets knocked out and he jumps up and runs around and say, well, every time you get knocked out, that means you got concussion. Within a few hours, you're going to be going into hospital and you might die or have brain damage. Every time, you get punched in the face several times or kicked while you're down, you might die. Something horrible might happen to you. You might go blind, It's like the stakes and the results are much more severe than people think. And even like all the people, the kind of MMA boxing fighters, it's like, you might not see what's wrong with them, but they are severely injured. Their old age is rough.
Yeah.
And yeah. And, they might take HGH or testosterone to try and age gracefully, but there's a point that won't work. And also there's daily headaches they're dealing with, and, things not working. And, it's a brutal, it's a brutal thing,
It is. In my travels too, I've talked with many old timer martial artists, almost all of which are nursing some kind of long-term chronic injury. And what I've found is that in the last, I don't know, 10, 15, 20, maybe 20 years, there's been some growing awareness about training not so hard that you now in your old age are absolutely miserable, can't walk or can't go up and down stairs. You can't kneel down. Your hands are all twisted up. Your joints are swollen, that sort of thing, to figure out, all right, how do we train to learn this so that we can have longevity in our lives and our bodies are, into our old age, but still get the value of being a good trainer. And there's been some really splendid examples to me of people who have aged. I look at like Benny the Jet Urquidez, he's still going strong I think he's in 70s, probably approaching 80 years old. He's done a great job. I really respect Eric Paulson. I see videos of him, and he's obviously older. He's not the spry, lithe athlete that he used to be, but boy, that guy knows his stuff. He doesn't have to go fast. He doesn't have to use athletics. These people give me inspiration for, as I grow older, because I'm coming up on 60, and but I want to have a body that's still functional, in my old age. I don't want to train so hard that, I struggle or I'm in pain all the time, and almost all of the instructors that have gone before me have said the same thing. I wanted to go hard and I did it just a bit too much. I should have backed off a little bit, but when you're young, you want to train hard. And I was exactly the same way. I like that stuff, but I was also aware enough to kind of look into the future as I saw people that had been doing it longer than I have and saw how they were struggling. And I started kind of early being able to, all right, I need to take care of my knees. I need to take care of my structure, my frame, my body. I want it to be useful as I grow older. And I think that training within the martial arts, especially the sport arts, have really gone through a renaissance in the last 20 years or so, led a lot by the Russians, but they've found that it's not the intensity. And this goes back, hundreds of years. People found out you can't just beat your body up and break it on a weekly basis and expect that you're going to learn, because now you're injured most of the time and you can't train. So, go light on the abuse part and go heavier on the form and learning the motions, and sprinkle it with a bit of that intensity and whatnot. You have to have a little bit of it, but don't do so much that you're getting injured or you're going to curse your body to misery for the last part of your life.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I'd answer that in two parts, I guess. I'd say that I thought I did all those things with my body, but I think the conundrum is that when you train your whole life to overcome stuff, you keep trying to overcome stuff. You try and overcome age. You try and overcome, and that's where it gets dangerous. I never understood why boxers and other fighters went too long. Now I do, because there's nothing else. And that's the guy you are now. It's you're that guy, and so it's difficult. You want to train forever, but it's difficult to find that balance. But it's a constant readjustment. And I think
I saw posted, just started to jump in, but I saw posted just this last week. It was some, I think it was judoka, and it showed some video of these two young men, and they were jumping up and doing, break falls on their back from, probably 4 feet in the air. And granted, these looked like smaller guys. I think they were Korean, shorter, lighter, and they're doing these impressive break falls. And it reminded me of something that an old timer told me once. He said, a body only has so many break falls in it. If you go through them too quickly and you come to the end, your skeleton and your body is going to be just, that's it for you. And and I remember meeting a judoka, and he was, I think, around 55 years old. And I remember shaking his hand, and I couldn't feel any skeleton. I could hear clicking in every one of his joints. When you train enough Aikido, you get a feel for somebody's skeleton just by touching him. And it felt to me like his skin was holding his skeleton together. And he admitted, he's like, yeah, my body's wrecked. I've been thrown and pounded so much that, but he's like, I love judo. I still compete in a seniors. But he said, I can't take the big falls anymore. The body's just done with it. So, well, I really related to him because I love the art. I love Aikido. I love martial arts. I want to keep doing it, but I realize as I age, you have to shift how you do that training, and you have to shift what you're doing. And this might bridge us into kind of the next topic of, looking at Aikido now and how we go about adjusting it to suit not only ourselves, but the demands of younger people that are coming in and are interested in martial arts and why they should look at Aikido. I think that's the dilemma that faces Aikido as a martial art today. How does it regain its relevance?
Well, that's a tough one. I
is.
mean, you can only lead by example, and I think, when I started martial arts, Asian martial arts they were unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Like fighters used to think Asian martial arts were gay in Australia, when I started, and then wouldn't be till the 80s before it became cool. And, and I think that the mystique of the Orient, and to me, part of the beauty of it is I like all the bowing and meditation. It's like when I come through that door, it's like that's a break from the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different me, a more kind of a me on a different, it's still me, but it's me in a different.
Yeah, it has a whole different feel than walking
plane.
into an old school boxing gym or a wrestling room. It's a different vibe.
It's a different vibe, exactly. And instead of the liniment smell, you've got another vibe. You've got and we keep it lighthearted here, but it's still, a Japanese dojo.
Mm-hmm.
We might have bags and stuff, but it's still a dojo.
Mm-hmm.
But what I was going to say is, like, over the years with all the video games and stuff, it's like Asian culture's been commodified, and people feel like they know it, even though they don't really know it. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it's even been lost in Asia now. And they're not really interested in the cultivation of the mind the way possibly, certainly I was, and I'm sure you were. And the thing is that there's so many forces putting the traditional martial arts down. I mean, people now, lots of people who don't think they're effective. I mean, they're obviously effective, but the reasons why a lot of them lost their combat efficacy were that you take them away from the battlefield and you teach them to people who are not in battle. And then those people become teachers. They start extrapolating on untested things with other untested things, and it accumulates crap.
No.
But even if it doesn't, if you have people with no fighting experience, it's tough to teach someone how to fight.
That's true.
But instead of acknowledging that, the kind of people commercialize everything. Like all the dojos now, you get a little star if you come in, and you get your little belts and your little this and that. I don't give any crap to my students. They all have white belts unless they have black belts. And someone says, how long will it take me to get a black belt? I say, well, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know. How much are you going to pump?
That reminds me of a story. I remember years ago, I saw a very senior instructor to me who, in my opinion, taught just nothing but nonsense Aikido. And he was kind of doing his thing. And this one of the students that came in brought his girlfriend with him. And she was just I think she was 19 years old. And she got to watch the instruction and this guy and whatnot. And I remember chatting with her afterwards. And she said, that guy doesn't know anything about violence. Like, I know I just got out of high school last year and I saw more violence in a hallway than this guy's probably experienced in his life. And I know that, I don't know what he was talking about, but it didn't make any sense to me. And I've always admired young people and children for showing the clarity of their observations. And it was honest. When you can have somebody who's just experienced merely the violence that is shown in a high school of young kids getting into fights and stuff, and they learn at least to comprehend what they're seeing, and to have that little dose of reality was I thought it was interesting, and it was worthy of note that you know this instructor had no clue what he was talking about in terms of actual violence, but he portrayed himself as somebody who did. Um, I've always found that to be problematic. Um,
Well, yeah,
it's not good
I
for the art.
was, but I think, your question about what do we do about it? I think the sad thing is this has all happened before.
Oh yeah.
Just like the whole MMA things happened before and
Mhm.
became unpopular, and boxing came out of the old style
Mhm.
MMA, which was kind of it didn't used to be called no holds barred, but the kind of all in wrestling, boxing, whatever fights. But it stopped because they were considered boring, because people essentially think that striking's more interesting. And you can still see it in the MMA now. People enjoy the striking fights more than the grappling fights.
Mhm.
But wrestling
Well, they're big and
was,
dramatic.
yeah, but
Big strikes to
wrestling
the
was
head
thought of
are
lame
exciting
and, yeah, it is.
and
But where I was
dramatic.
going with that was, like, wrestling was thought of as lame for like 50, 60 years.
Mhm.
And you had those few people like in Wigan and stuff keeping submission wrestling going. And I
Mhm.
feel like I'm one of those guys now. It's the first time I'm old enough to have lived through something I'm world class at, and now nobody's really interested in it anymore. And I think it's all
Mhm.
crap.
Mhm.
But just like wrestling wasn't crap and it came back, and judo
Mhm.
came back, I think Aikido will come back. It might take 60 years. I don't know. But
No.
what makes me sad is that people, I mean, the solution is people doing a lot of BJJ, and they're doing, whatever to try and fix it. But you're
Mhm.
seeing people that can't really fight getting low level at something else and then trying to add it into Aikido. And I was at this seminar, and I was teaching, and they were kind of asking me, like, how do, you can do all these things, and, how do I make my Aikido good? And I'm saying, well, given that I've done it, I don't recommend you do BJJ. I don't recommend you do kickboxing. I don't recommend you do boxing. I said, you can do that. And I did it. But is that going to take away from your other training?
Mhm.
Are you going to become a kickboxer, or are you going to do Aikido? Because if you want to be good at Aikido, you need to do Aikido. The real
Mhm.
answer is put yourself in the situation where you have to make your Aikido work.
Mhm.
That's the way you make it work. It's not a magic solution. It's a boring solution. Nobody wants to hear that. Well,
No.
just go and
Yeah.
spar everybody else that you're scared of.
Mhm.
Spar all the guys that can beat you up. Like, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. It's not the magic pill that they were expecting.
No.
But it's like, you can expect to get those injuries, whether
Mhm.
it's, and would you continue? But the real thing is, like, and that's what I've always tried to do. I've always tried to do pure Aikido. Like, I've sparred everyone, but I tried to use my Aikido in all those situations.
Mhm.
And that's why my Aikido is the way it is.
Mhm.
But I always, I'm a bit of a, you know, I'm a bit of an Aikido nut. I love Aikido. I mean,
Mhm.
to be really good at the martial arts, like, nobody needs to do as much martial arts as I've done,
Mhm.
and probably you've done. It's like
Mhm.
there's a point where you can fight. Like, whether you can fight better or worse, it's more like how serious are you going to get? Are you fighting to take this guy out, or are you, what's your plan here?
Mm-hmm.
And as you get
Well, and
older,
I think that reflects in your training too. Because I've seen people and I've felt the lure of this is when you get into an art, you at first you want to learn the bread and butter, the stuff that is the most effective, most useful, most versatile. And almost every art has their stuff, the things that the basics. And then you get into it, it's like, okay, now I'm learning basics. Now I want to have more advanced technique. I want to get the esoteric stuff, the stuff that's highly specialized, and you get deep into the weeds. And what I've found is, a lot of people when they get to that point of, all right, I'm well familiar with all of the up and down of the syllabus and the material and the techniques. Maybe they get a little bored with practicing the basics and the fundamentals, and they think it's so simple they've got it already. And they're like, well, now I want to take on another art, and they go do the same thing with the next art, and they go start with the basics and get deep. And now they're burning off decades of training because it takes a long time to go that deep. What I've found, I really like going after the basics of those different arts because that's the stuff where the most useful tools are. The really weird, convoluted, complicated, low percentage techniques are a little. I'm mildly interested in them because I'm a martial arts geek. I kind of like all of it. But when it comes to, okay, Tristan, it's your survival now. I want to go to that bread and butter stuff. And whether that's the Muay Thai thigh kick or the Savat shin kick or the, Iriminage with Aikido, which, whether it's Iriminage or Shomanate or something direct, just throw, boom, done. Every art's got simple things, wrestling and their leg takedowns, or snap downs with judo, stuff like that. I love that stuff for that practicality. And I think that, collecting, and what I try to do is keep Aikido as my core art. And when training my students, I take the low percentage, kind of the obscure stuff, and I kind of put that to the back burner, and I replace the training time with stuff from other arts, which is very useful, very practical. Not to say that, even though I do train my students to have grappling ability, be able to get up off the ground under pressure, they're not going to go win wrestling tournaments. They're not going to be able to out wrestle a wrestler who is a specialist in that realm. But against somebody who just wants to tackle them or something, they're not going to be able to be held down, or they're going to have tools that a grappler would use to get on top and to use pins and submissions and maneuvers that's what it was built for. And I still love Aikido, and it is still my core art. But there's other useful stuff to bring into it. I think you've done that. I know Bruce Bookman's done it. There have been others that have found that approach that's going to make their martial art. And I don't know. Perhaps Aikido might do that as an art, but I think, like you said, it's going to come down to individuals making a choice of what they want their martial art to be, and try to fill in the holes, not have as many as they did just by doing, Aikido alone or what have you. Your thoughts?
Well, I think, it's hard to argue against something I've done,
Of course.
I don't, well, certainly I try not to have any of my other training in my Aikido, but an example would be, a lot of people, they're not into Aikido striking, but to me, Aikido striking is super effective.
Mm-hmm.
All of it, but knowing how to do it, knowing when to apply it and which to apply in what situation,
mm-hmm.
That's a different scenario. So all these people are trying to do different types of striking other than Aikido striking, but not realizing Aikido striking fits perfectly into Aikido.
Mm-hmm.
And so if if you're boxing someone, you're turning the right hand on, you're coming online, it's breaking your humney. I mean, you could equate it to, like turning the quarter turn, the hip turn, whatever. But, you kind of, losing that thing that Aikido is the best at, which is the harmony and the vector on the attack in attack and defense. You know, to me, doing other martial arts is like a holiday. It's like, I live in Melbourne. I like Melbourne. It's too cold. Sometimes every winter I want to go somewhere warm. You know, I don't do martial arts to make me better at fighting. I do it for fun. Like I train with Doyle Shillelagh, with Bernard Letty, who's like the best in the world, or after
That
Doyle.
stuff is great.
But I don't do it to be better at anything. I mean, I can fight with sticks. I've been doing it all my life. I've got knives all over the place. I mean, you know, I've got every kind of knife and just, you know, hacking, stabbing, like smacking thing you could possibly have. But I love doing it, and it's just it's fun for me. But I think that you know, I think it's getting back to that thing, like, to be good at something, you only need a few techniques. Like we have you know, there's probably, you know, I'd say there's really Ikkyo, Irimi, Koshinage, you know, Shihanage, Atemi. There's kind of 6 things in Aikido. Really, and you've got, you know, Migi and Hidari Awase, and you've got Urawaza or Tenkan in some styles they call it, or whatever. And that's kind of all you've got. You've got the Happo Giri or the Happo Ski, and that's kind of what it is. And then all of those techniques come from that. So it's not like 2,000 techniques. It's like 6 or 7 techniques. And so it's
with
like
additional variations. Yeah,
it's the same as boxing. It's got the same, you know, it's like, you know, 1, 2, whatever, you know, it's like, and that's what it is. If you understand that, and that's really what's wrong, I think. And I was talking about this to my students, because a lot of them are going to be grading soon. So like, if you were my private student, I wouldn't teach you techniques like that. We'd go in here, we'd do this and that. I'd teach you how to fight with it. I wouldn't teach you like 1, 2, 3, Ikkyo, Nikyo, Yonkyo, Sankyo. It's like you'd have Ikkyo, they pulled their arm back, they dropped their elbow, they punched you or went to punch you, they went to kick you, whatever. It wouldn't be like we train, but it's like, because people get paid to learn Aikido, it's like I'm going to dole out the techniques, and it can be a good way to train, you know, but it also, people can get lost in the techniques instead of the takamusu, being able to express themselves with Aikido.
Sure.
And you know, to me, like, everybody's like, personally, I'm best at Irimi. Like, you know, if I get in position, I can throw anyone with Irimi. And probably second best, Koshinage. If I grab someone upper body, I can throw pretty much anyone. They'd have to be a hell of a lot taller than me for me to struggle to throw them, like, you know, 6'6" or something. But it's like, you know, that's me. Someone else, someone tall, it might be Ikkyos. It might be, you know, it could be anything. You know, you're going to pick a few techniques that really work for you. And then there are going to be little offshoots. You get into this situation, you use that one, what have you. It's not like I'm going to, but even so, I train everything, because there will be moments I use that, and that's rounding out my Aikido sphere of movement. You know, you don't want to be predictable. You want to be options in all, and that's the unique thing about Aikido. You're moving in a sphere, not forward and backward, side to side. And so to me, like, you get your head across all those, and there's so much interest in that. Like, I train with this guy as a professional, you know, kickboxer and MMA fighter. Well, he's retired now, but recently, he's a lot younger than me. He's not even 30 yet. You know, and he loves Aikido. You know, he sees how effective it is because it's effective. And there's so much of it that's actually kind of similar. And it's only ineffective teachers or teachers that are talking crap that are going to shame Aikido, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that, and he was saying, I was talking to him about this very point about how, there seems to be this self-hate in Aikido students or Aikido people about Aikido, and making excuses for their art and stuff, and talking about the pressure testing stuff, and he was saying, well, and we were talking about that, and he made a great point to me. He said, yeah, that's boring. It's like, I've been fighting all my life. There's not much to it. You're going to elbow them, punch them in the face, kick them low. MMA, you're going to strike to take down, to pummel them from the mount. It's like, it's not very complicated, and it hurts, and that's all you do.
Well, and this is something I've had people on the podcast before that personally, I find this the best endorsement of Aikido is how many police officers, bouncers, security people, those who have professions that deal with violence for real, most of them have said that their Aikido training is what they use the most in real life violent situations. And when people that have no exposure to real life violence tend to look at sport fighting as being an example of what fighting is. And they would only do an art that proves itself in sport. Well, sport isn't real life violence. And those professionals, like I said, cops and whatnot, when they say, this is what I use on the job, this is what I use every day, or, on a weekly basis, this has proven itself to me in my profession when I've needed it. And I get the same from you. You've had a lot of experience with real live violence that, Aikido does work. The problem is it doesn't provide trophies. You don't get belts. You don't get, that endorsement. But, when somebody who deals with a real life, no rules, violent situation says, hey, Aikido is what I go to. And I've had people that say, I've studied half a dozen arts. I've done the fill in the blank, whether it's boxing or Krav Maga or, whatever. I said, Aikido is the one that's the most practical. And it works. So I find that's a fantastic endorsement of what at least I like from Aikido. I realize we're over the 90 minutes, so I'll let you maybe address that and we'll kind of wrap things up. But what are your thoughts on it?
Well, it gets back to that thing. Sensei used to teach really experienced martial artists, and the same thing, like, all the really good martial artists, like that really, really good martial artists I've ever known, love Aikido because they instantly see how advanced and what its solutions are for those kind of situations. I don't think anybody needs to apologize about Aikido. They need to look to themselves and say, what am I really trying to do here? Am I really that guy? Or do I want to be able to protect myself and escape? Or do I just want to do something fun? And they're all valid things, Aikido came from the battlefield. I mean, the very idea that it doesn't work is ridiculous. Like, certainly the Aikido that I know, it's techniques that have been around for 800 years from the battlefield, whether it's with the weapons or empty hand, like they've been proven over and over again. Like the way you put it together, it might vary, but and I think that's where the problem is. People who don't have fighting experience try and change stuff. Like everything I didn't think worked that I learned from Saito Sensei, as I got through over the years, I learned did work. There was just something, a piece I was missing, and maybe it was lost in translation or whatever the situation. And also what I learned, I made my own. I've taken it into my own environment, into my own life, into my own psyche, my own inventiveness. But that doesn't mean I'm going to try and invent new things. I might invent different training methods, or I might, work on ways that work a certain skill in a different way, or work out different combinations of basic techniques, because they obviously fit into the rubric of what Aikido is. But I'm not going to try and pick something out of the air and, make it mine and call it Marcus Aikido, or try and invent something different that's better than everyone else. It's like, the real thing is do what it is better than anyone else. And real Aikido was used against, live blades in battles and bayonets in war. It's like, you're not going to improve it. Like, certainly not. Yeah, you're not going to improve it. You might, what it is learning how to apply those techniques in the environment that you exist in. And my environment might be different from yours. My environment in downtown Melbourne might be different from downtown Minneapolis, might be different in the country, in the, outback or whatever. It's like, everybody's got their scenarios, but, the spider needs to know their web. You apply it to your life. And that's the way you make it effective. And, we've seen Aikido in Australia and the world go from like a highly respected, considered the most advanced art, although I think that's a bit of a strange way of looking at it, but certainly a super effective art that was, kind of the master stroke of the jewel in the martial artist's crown, to like pilloried, because you've got like people who can't fight going to try and fight some MMA guy and getting smashed. And it's like, if I lose a fight, it doesn't mean Aikido's bad. It meant I lost the fight, and the reality is, like, the unbeaten fighter doesn't exist, even though, like, Hickson Gracie, who I think is amazing, and I've trained with bunches of Gracies. I've, trained with Gordo, the maker of the half guard, and I've been in Brazil. I've got, heaps of jiu-jitsu medals and shit. It's like, but they like Aikido. I mean, they like jiu-jitsu more, but it's like, everybody has to have faith in what they do. Otherwise, it's got no value. And Aikido has a huge value. I think it's like the Aikido as a vehicle of self-realization, I think, is unparalleled. It certainly is in my life. Like I always say to people, like, Aikido saved my life. And, I don't know what would have happened to me without Aikido. And not just in the sense of physical training, but mental resilience, and just as a methodology, like the training methodology you can apply to anything in life. Like that static flowing key way of training techniques can be applied to anything you do. And it really, to me, it relates to, the static, fluid, and non-stable, matter, in the universe. It's like you're dealing with the essential, the building blocks of the universe. And you can apply that to learning anything. And you're learning to use the gravitation of the universe, but in your personal sphere. It's like a fascinating science. It's of endless intellectual and physical value and fun. And
it is, and unfortunately, this podcast is not endless. But so I want to thank you, Marcus, for coming on. This has been a very fascinating discussion. I know we could probably talk all day, but we'll have to cap it here. But thank you very much for joining me. And any one quick last comment, or?
Yeah, well, I'd just say, I hope people don't lose faith in Aikido. I think, as you can see, I'm pretty passionate about it. And, Aikido has a place with all the great martial arts. It's a wonderful martial art and doesn't need to be diluted. It's just people need to bite down harder and, you've got to risk it for the biscuit. If you want to be good at it, put yourself in harm's way and accept the lumps and the breaks and if you don't want to get hurt, well, don't complain that you're not as good a fighter as someone that is. It's not rocket science.
Excellent advice. But thank you, everybody, for listening, and thank you, Marcus, for joining me. And until the next time, enjoy your training.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. It was great to have you.
See you later.
Yep. Take care, everybody.